Welcome to Nature Nights, where we discuss Florida ecology and conservation efforts within some of the Sunshine State's ecosystems. I'm Jenny.
I'm Stephanie.
I'm Andrea.
And I'm Cesar. Today we'll talk about our beautiful state scrub. Let's get started.
So according to the article, Sand Pine in Florida's Scrub Jays by Janet Hinchy, there are 383,000 acres of scrub found in Florida. Hey Jenny, did you know that most of the scrub ecosystem in Florida is found right here in Central Florida?
No way. Can you tell us a little bit more about the history and background of this ecosystem?
Yeah, you've heard Florida used to be fully underwater, right? Well, scrub used to be dunes that made up Florida's shoreline until sea levels fell. They are now patches of sandy islands surrounded by land. You can find most scrub habitat on the inland peninsula. An example is the Ocala National Forest, which is one of the largest scrub habitats in Florida. However, there is also coastal scrub, too. They are affected by coastal sprays, while the interior scrub are not. Scrub are unique because their plant community consists primarily of evergreen shrubs such as rosemary, oak, saw palmetto, and sandpine. The sandy soil in scrub habitats is very well drained and low in nutrients. This causes the vegetation to stay short. However, the plants there are well adapted to wet and dry seasons along with the poor nutrients in the soil. Mentioned in the book Florida Uplands by Whitney, investigating their genes could help humans come up with solutions in dealing with crops where soil is infertile and global warming. Not only the plants and scrubs are interesting though. Scrub are ecologically important because they have many species only found there. They replenish our aquifers, which are porous rocks saturated with groundwater, and are a refuge for animals needing to escape from sea level rise. There are lots of unique animals in scrub habitats. I personally love insects, so I took some time to speak with UCF's Bug Closet Collection Manager, Sean Kelly, to discuss some of scrub's endemic insect species. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing just fine. How are you?
Great. So can you explain to me why scrubs are so important?
Well, sure. They're a unique habitat that's found mostly in Florida, some parts of southern Georgia and Alabama. But there's not very much of it, and the conditions in the habitat are quite unique. They're very dry, sandy soils, and this creates a condition where only certain types of plants and animals can live. And a lot of these plants and animals are unique to the scrub habitat.
So what are some unique insect species that can be found in scrub?
Yeah, great question. So there are some types of insects that are associated with these special plants that are only found in scrub. One example of that is the Florida rosemary grasshopper. And this grasshopper only feeds and lives on Florida rosemary, which is only found, well, it's found a little bit elsewhere, but the rosemary grasshopper is only found in north and central Florida in scrubs on this plant, and it feeds on the plant.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and another few examples of that include some oligolectic bees. Now, oligolectic means bees that feed, or not necessarily bees, but species that only feed on one type of plant flower. And so there are two examples of some oligolectic bees that are found in Florida scrubs. One that's kind of famous is called the blue calamint bee, and this is this really neat, like medium-sized species of osmia, and it's metallic blue. And this species only feeds on a species of calamint that's found on the southern and middle part of the Lake Wales Ridge. And they're only found as adults when this plant is blooming, and very restricted. They're only known from a few sites on scrub on the Lake Wales Ridge. Another example of a bee that's oligolectic and also found in scrub is a species of Calides, and these are cute little black and yellow bees, and this species of Calides is again found on the Lake Wales Ridge, and it feeds on tough buckthorn, and it again only found on scrub on the Lake Wales Ridge. Here on campus, we actually have a few species of interesting scrub species. one being the scrub palmetto scarab, and this is another species that's endemic to Florida, endemic to the peninsular Florida scrubs. And we can find it on campus visiting scrub palmetto and gopher apple. It's a flower visiting scarab in May.
Wow, so that could possibly be found in the Arboretum?
Yes, yeah, it
Interesting.
is. That's right. And then I wanted to bring up two more interesting examples. So because of this condition of the scrub, they're former islands, and now there's actual islands of habitat surrounded by different types of habitat. And so these island conditions lead to speciation, especially in groups of organisms that have become flightless. And so I'll give you two examples of flightless genera where they have speciated on different ridges in scrub habitat. One is this really neat little beetle. They're tiny, like 3 millimeters long, and they live in the sand, under vegetation in the sand in scrub. And if you go to different ridges, you can find different species of these things because they basically don't disperse very far. They don't have wings. They're very tiny. They can't move very quickly. And so they're basically just separated. They're allopatric, separated populations that have speciated over time.
Interesting.
There's one other example I'll bring up is are these cool scrub-loving Melanopus grasshoppers. These grasshoppers are wingless as well. They're on the surface though, and they're feeding on oaks and gopher apple. But because they're wingless, again, they don't disperse very far. And if you go to the different ridges, the different scrub ridges in Florida, you could find different species.
Wow, that's really cool. So how can people help save these species? I know that scrub is threatened right now because of fire suppression and the development and everything else. There's multiple things affecting it. So how can people help these insect species?
Well, there's some different ways you can do it. I mean, one is just to go out, be aware, enjoy nature, and try to convince other people to do so as well. But more effectively would be to join and contribute to groups that are conservation groups that specifically want to conserve natural lands in Florida. The Native Plant Society, for instance, or the Florida Wildlife Federation. And so joining those groups, volunteering with them. Also, being more active politically, perhaps. Writing letters to the Florida legislator, telling them fund Florida forever, that kind of stuff.
Sounds great. Well, I appreciate your time so much. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
There are also some animal species that are endemic to this area. The Florida scrub jay is endemic to only the Florida scrub, and these birds barely migrate and they stay with their family colonies. An unfortunate fact is that about 10,000 individuals were recorded in 2017, according to the Sibley Birds Field Guide. Gopher tortoises are also found in scrub, and they're native to southeastern Florida, and they're very important to the scrub ecosystem. They are a keystone species, and they live about 40 to 60 years in the wild. They create burrows that not only keep them protected and act as their home, but they also protect endemic species at the scrub. Gopher tortoises are considered a threatened species and are protected under state law.
Fire is imperative to scrub. Scrub are a fire-dependent ecosystem and require fire to keep it healthy. This ecosystem depends on an infrequent to moderate fire to maintain the structure and the diversity of the vegetation. Usually the fire does not start within the scrub, but a neighboring ecosystem like the oak hammocks. The reason the fire frequency is high is because of the amount of open space that is found in the scrub. The more dense an ecosystem is, the less a fire will burn. Some species like the sand pine, which needs fire for their seeds to sprout. The fire frequency for scrub depends on the main vegetation that is found. The average and the best option for fire in scrub is roughly every 10 to 15 years. This allows the vegetation to grow and develop their roots. Too much fire can lead to low species diversity because few plants are adapted better to fire. Too much fire can also make some of the endemic species leave the scrub, like the Florida scrub jay, in a more dense ground cover.
Now that we know how important fire is to the scrub, we can talk about how the lack of fire is one of the main conservation issues to this ecosystem.
The scrub has fire suppression because of people buying homes and not wanting fire near them. And the development of land creates fragmentation, which breaks up land through barriers where fire can't travel as easily through the landscape. The Florida scrub jay, which is Florida's only endemic state bird, relies on fire to have open spaces so they can identify predators from a distance, and they forage and store their acorns in the sand as a food source for later. Without fire, the scrub jay would not be able to survive because dense vegetation would not be kept in check. According to BirdLife International, the scrub jay breeding population has decreased by over 25% since 1993, which is caused by predation from cats, restricted gene flow where the scrub jays cannot mate and eventually become different species, from habitat fragmentation, and climate change from drought and hurricanes. Another main characteristic of the scrub are sand pine trees, which only open their cones and release their seeds when exposed to fire, so this key species needs fire to give rise to new generations. Without fire, the scrub will transform into an entirely different ecosystem with other trees taking over. Another main threat is loss of land and overdevelopment due to pine plantations, the housing industry, and citrus groves. Agriculture removes the scrub ecosystem entirely as it transforms the landscape into a food source for humans. This loss of this land means the loss of numerous endemic species, like the Florida scrub jay mentioned before and the sand skink.
Good point, Jenny. We all see how the ecosystem is impacted. Some of the endemic species leave when the scrub is overgrown, which is around 20 years after a fire. Some of these species are the scrub jay. When the scrub gets too high, the scrub jay and other animals that need to see the ground for food gets harder because the scrub gets more dense with the time passing after a fire. Habitat fragmentation is also a key factor to the animals in the ecosystem, and it makes it harder for the animals that live there. The fragmentation makes their food source scarce in the habitat. They will need to travel further to find their food source. Habitat fragmentation can also lead to inbreeding because of the few species abundant is very low due to the fragmentation. Scrub jay inbreeding is a big problem, especially since these species is endemic to the scrub. All this inbreeding causes more diseases among the species because the diversity is lower, and this does not allow for a lot of genetic variation.
I wonder, what are some ways we've taken action towards conservation efforts?
Thanks for asking, Stephanie. So, coastal cities in Florida are very aware about how our scrub is doing. This is what the state is doing so far. They're creating incentives to halt resource extraction, and they're also creating coalitions for land management. We have Brevard County, which has the Environmentally Endangered Lands Program, also known as the EEL program, which acquires, protects, and maintains environmentally endangered lands, guided by scientific principles for conservation and the best available practices for resources, stewardship, and ecosystem management. It was established in 1990. We also have Charlotte County, Florida, and their conservation plan, which helps ensure the safety of scrub jays. They have yearly reports about the scrub jay numbers and safety measures, and they also have the community reach out about sightings and protective measurements. We also have fire management that can come from help from volunteers and not just a fire management team, and we also create protected areas around Florida.
We're also monitoring the scrub jay population. One of the ways we're monitoring the population is getting volunteers to identify the scrub jay without an identifying anklet. Another way is keeping track of the bird's movement with the anklet. Translocation is moving a whole family of scrub jay to a new environment to help promote the population or to help with competition in the existing environment. This does not always have a good impact on the population because sometimes the juvenile is not moved with the rest of the family, and this makes it more stressful on the parents because the juvenile is the helper. But overall, the translocation is a beneficial method to improve the population of the scrub jays.
Ecosystem conservation is not just based on one group that wants to manage or restore an ecosystem. It's up to all of us. One way you can help is to volunteer with local restoration groups and land management groups. If you can't help in that way, going on social media and talking about conservation efforts helps spread awareness to others in your community.
I know what I'm doing for my next volunteer project.
If you'd like to get involved, here are some resources. The Brevard Zoo is involved with translocation of some scrub jays in the area of Palm Bay. One of the main conservation efforts for the scrub jay is the Charlotte County Scrub Jay Habitat Plan. Another great way to help out is to look for volunteer, or even donate to the local state park, which helps preserve the environment and the living organisms that are found in the park.
That's a lot. Now you all have information about scrub and why it's so important to conserve this beautiful ecosystem.
That's it for us this week.
Join us next week where we will talk about freshwater marshes and how important they are to us in Florida.